Your friends want you broke. The smile is the weapon, the question is the plan, and that silence, the one that fills the room every time you start to rise. That is the oldest trap in human history, and the Bible mapped it long before the internet gave it a screen to hide behind. Today, you will discover why stealth wealth is a spiritual survival code written into the oldest book on earth. Stay until the very end, because the final revelation will permanently change how you see every dollar you have protected and every dream you have shared too soon. Here is where it begins. With a coat. A boy walked out of his father's tent wearing a robe of many colors. 17 years old, with dreams that even angels would take seriously. The first thing he did, the very first move, was tell everyone. Genesis chapter 37 verse 4 reads, "But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him." That robe was not just fabric. It was a declaration, a display, a signal broadcast to everyone watching that said, "I have been chosen. I have more than you." And before Joseph could grow into the greatness God had prepared for him, his own circle, his own blood, threw him into a pit. People who had eaten at the same table and prayed to the same God did this. That coat is still being worn today, just cut from different material. You put a down payment on a house and post it to your stories. You get a promotion and announce it at the family dinner table. You start building something real, and instead of guarding it in silence, you hand the entire blueprint to people who are not ready to witness your growth without measuring it against their own stagnation. And then you wonder why the energy in the room shifts, why the phone calls get shorter, why the congratulations sound rehearsed. Joseph's fatal mistake was not dreaming too big. It was revealing the dream too soon, to the wrong audience, before the dream had developed enough armor to survive contact with human jealousy. The Bible did not record that moment as carelessness. It recorded it as a warning so precise it would take centuries to fully decode. Inside this ancient text, you are going to learn exactly what Joseph learned, but without paying his price. Stop for a moment and ask yourself this. Has anyone in your life ever celebrated your success just a little too quietly? You know the moment. The congratulations arrived half a second late, delivered with that particular flatness in the voice, something like, "Oh, wow, good for you." And there was a look that lingered just a beat too long before the subject changed. You felt it immediately. Something was wrong. But you talked yourself out of naming it because it seemed uncharitable. The Bible does not talk you out of it. Genesis chapter 37 verse 11 says, "And his brothers envied him." The scripture uses that word without apology, without softening it, without adding a qualifier. Jealousy rarely arrives as a screaming adversary at your gate. Far more often, it sits quietly at your table, smiles through the meal, and prays privately for your plateau. Here is the psychology the ancient text encodes. People do not always resent you personally. What they struggle to accept is the distance your progress creates between where you have arrived and where they are still standing. When you move forward, you become a mirror that they are forced to walk past every time they see your face. And the discomfort that follows has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with what that mirror forces them to confront about themselves. The ancient Hebrew concept of the evil eye, ayin hara, was never superstition. It was a sociological observation, precise enough to survive 3,000 years of civilization. Visibility invites attack, and the most dangerous attacks on your provision travel through words. Through the quiet undermining of your reputation in rooms you never entered. Through small seeds of doubt planted in the minds of people who hold real influence over your future opportunities. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 4 asks this. "Wrath is cruel, fury overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy?" The writer does not place wrath at the top of the list. Jealousy sits there alone because wrath at minimum requires a reason, whereas jealousy requires nothing at all. It feeds on your blessing without ever asking your permission. And the modern world handed this ancient danger a megaphone. The middle class invented a lethal, invisible competition called the status display. Work 40 hours a week to afford things that signal to observers that you do not need to work 40 hours a week. Buy the car that costs more than your savings account, wear the watch that announces your arrival before you open your mouth, and park everything visible in front of a house that costs more than your net worth because the neighborhood has to witness it. None of that is building. Why, every dollar performing for an audience is a dollar that stopped compounding for your future. And every display of provision is an open invitation answered by the very envy that quietly dismantles what you are actually constructing. The genuinely wealthy never entered that competition. Generation after generation, they refused. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments, because what comes next is the principle the financial elite have guarded for generations, and I want to know who inside this community is already living it. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. Read this slowly. There is one who pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. There is one who pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. Read it a second time. The man who wrote that line, the wealthiest sovereign the ancient world recorded, was describing two strategies, and only one of them produces a legacy that outlasts the man who built it. King Solomon controlled trade routes stretching from Egypt to Arabia, and maintained alliances that spanned continents. The resources dedicated to his temple alone would translate into hundreds of billions in any modern currency. And yet, the text does not record Solomon announcing his balance sheet in the marketplace. What it records is wisdom, systems, architecture, agreements formed in silence and secured through strategy, not spectacle. What most people walk right past in that verse is a deeper implication. Disclosing your assets before they are fully established draws people whose intentions you have not yet had time to discern. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 12 confirms this from a different angle. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. Solomon is not romanticizing poverty in that line. He is diagnosing the specific anxiety that follows public wealth, because when the world knows what you carry, the world develops reasons to reach for it. Think about the most financially stable people you actually know. Are they broadcasting their portfolio or announcing their acquisitions across social media? Their silence is not humility performed for an audience. It is methodology practiced as a discipline across years. Listen carefully to this next passage, because prosperity culture tends to skip over it entirely. Proverbs chapter 6 verse 1 through 3 reads, My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth. Signing your name onto another person's debt before they have built the discipline to carry their own weight is not loyalty. The text calls it a snare. And a snare exists specifically to hold you in place while everything you have built continues to bleed. If this wisdom is landing, press like right now, because what we are building in this space deserves to be found by the people who genuinely need it. Biblical asset protection is stewardship at its most serious. If what God placed in your hands is left exposed to every envious gaze and every covenant entered through guilt rather than wisdom, you are not protecting a blessing. You are gambling with a sacred trust. Picture this. Two men pull up to the same building. One drives a $40,000 truck with custom rims, freshly detailed, commanding attention from the parking lot before he even reaches the door. The other steps out of a 7-year-old sedan with a small scratch on the rear bumper, and they walk through the same entrance, sit at the same table, and at the end of the meeting, one of them writes a check that could purchase the building outright. It is the man from the old sedan. This is the observable pattern of generational capital operating in plain sight. The people whose families have held real assets across multiple decades understand something the status-obsessed have never internalized. The loudest money in the room is almost never the most powerful money in the room. The Apostle Paul encoded this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 11, when he wrote, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands. Sit with that phrase. Make it your ambition to be quiet. In a culture that has made visibility a currency, Paul delivers an apostolic reversal. Channel your ambition toward deeper construction rather than louder announcements, toward a stronger foundation rather than a wider audience. And verse 12 answers why. So that you will lack nothing. Silence shields what you build from the friction of external envy, unsolicited pressure, and the financial cost of performing prosperity at the expense of your actual savings. Now consider what a sudden windfall does to a person the moment they broadcast it. Every person who has received an inheritance, a business exit, or a sharp income increase and then announced it publicly has lived a version of the same story. The distant relatives surface, old acquaintances reappear with fresh needs, and proposals arrive dressed in family loyalty and spiritual language, carrying the unspoken suggestion that refusing makes you cold, ungrateful, and unbiblical. Solomon witnessed this inside the courts of kings. Paul watched it fracture the early church. It is unfolding in real time right now, on every platform engineered around the economics of display. The deeper issue is exposure. Every announcement you make about what you hold, before it is fully established, hands the map of your treasure to people who have not yet demonstrated they are genuinely in your corner. And that is not caution born from distrust. That is discernment functioning exactly as Scripture describes it should. Guard what is growing. Everything being built needs a season of hiddenness before it can bear the weight of being seen. There comes a moment in the life of anyone building something real when a decision has to be made about the inner circle, and it rarely looks the way people expect. There is no confrontation, no speech, no single dramatic event. It is a gradual reorientation, a quiet shift in where your energy flows, and who receives access to the unfinished version of what you are becoming. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 7 says, "Stay away from a fool, for you will not find knowledge on their lips." The Scripture does not instruct you to make an announcement. Stay away, it says, quietly, consistently, without explanation. True separation is architectural, carried out through choices that slowly redirect the load-bearing weight of your life towards stronger ground, rather than through declarations that simply invite argument. Watch carefully who grows unusually animated when you stumble. There is a category of people in nearly every life who are not adversaries in the traditional sense, yet who have quietly made your failure a condition of their own comfort. When you stagnate, they do not have to confront why they have not moved either. Your stagnation is their alibi, and your growth threatens it. So when you begin building something visible, the response is rarely gracious. Jesus demonstrated the principle of strategic withdrawal, with the kind of precision that only someone operating under divine clarity could maintain. After feeding 5,000 people, when the crowd attempted to force him into a political role, John chapter 6 verse 15 records, "Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. The moment the environment became loud, manipulative, and oriented around public performance, he removed himself from the pressure system. Because the next assignment required silence, and he chose silence over crowd approval without hesitation. This is strategic isolation functioning correctly. A workshop, a protected environment, where the next phase is built in the absence of those who are not yet prepared to encounter it until it stands on its own. And then there is the capital preservation strategy in its most ancient and practical form. Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verse 2 reads, "Distribute your portion to 7, or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. Spread your assets quietly, through private commitments of resources placed across multiple sectors that your loudest critics will never know exist." This is how ancient wealth survives catastrophe. Invisibility is the armor, and the display is the vulnerability. John Wesley lived 87 years, delivered over 40,000 sermons, and traveled roughly 250,000 miles on horseback across his lifetime. At the height of his income, when royalties from his publications reached thousands of pounds annually, He continued living on 28 pounds a year because he had locked his lifestyle completely still and let everything above his baseline flow outward. His rule was tested across decades and remained consistent. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. What rarely gets quoted about Wesley's approach is what the saving actually meant to him. He described it as the deliberate removal of every expense that serves only the pride of life, stripping the performance layer away entirely. He was building a reservoir, quiet and out of sight, a reserve from which he could respond to every divine assignment that crossed his path without asking anyone's permission before acting. That reservoir is the whole point of everything said tonight. Money that makes noise draws several varieties of thief toward it. Not just the literal kind, but the relational kind as well. The pressure to co-sign a debt entered through sentiment instead of wisdom. The social obligation that arrives dressed in family loyalty. The slow resentment working against you inside the relationships nearest to your life. All of these are forms of theft, and all of them are made possible by the same thing: visibility at the wrong time. Silence, the kind rooted in strategy and stewardship rather than shame, is the climate in which interest multiplies and legacy quietly takes shape across years. Joseph eventually stood before Pharaoh and received authority over the entire economy of Egypt. He arrived there through years of preparation that no one in his original circle ever witnessed. The coat was stripped from him, and his brothers believed they had ended the story. What they could not take was the dream, because the dream had moved into a protected space. The kind where God builds things that human envy cannot reach, precisely because those things are hidden until they are ready. That same space is available to you, and it is a place of absolute focus built on patience and hiddenness. The people who will one day encounter the fruit of what you are constructing do not need to observe the process. They only need to stand in front of the finished thing when it is time. This channel exists to carry these principles forward, to every person building in silence during the long season before the fruit is visible. Subscribe, because the next teaching in the Solomon Asset Allocation series delivers the exact ancient tested framework for structuring what you hold so that no single threat can dismantle what God has already called yours. May God guard what is growing in your hands and shield from every envious eye what He has already declared belongs to your future. Build in silence. Stay faithful in the hidden season. The fruit will speak when it is time.